bothered some American-based oil companies to some degree. Why would the Saudis be more interested in selling their oil to China than to the U.S.? Could it have something to do with the fact that China isn't, currently at least, invading any of Saudi Arabia's neighbors? Or could it have something to do with the fact that the Saudis actually have more faith in the Chinese economy? Remember the very first slide we saw, I talked about increasing levels, burgeoning levels of national debt here in the U.S. This is partly as a result of these unbelievable tax cuts that were implemented in the last 4 years, but also simply a result of the tremendous dependence of the U.S. on imported oil and other resources and manufactured products. We're running up record trade deficits and also government deficits. Basically, the rest of the world is bailing us out by investing in the U.S. economy. And that includes the Chinese. The Chinese are have been buying T-bills and helping to keep the dollar afloat, helping to keep the U.S. economy afloat. The U.S. and China are in a strange kind of dance. You know, we buy all this cheap plastic crap from the Chinese in our Walmarts, which helps their economy, and they take the money they earn in the process and buy oil that we might otherwise want to buy, and they also buy U.S. Treasury bills to keep the U.S. economy afloat so that we can buy more cheap plastic stuff in Walmart that comes from China. It's, like I said, it's an interesting sort of dance. We are heavily... another thing they do with their foreign exchange income is that they buy food from American farmers, because the Chinese are no longer capable of feeding their own people. Right? So we're in sort of a mutual dance of interdependency. Meanwhile, we're holding swords over each other's heads. This is not a happy situation now, but imagine what it's going to become like when we're past the oil production peak and there isn't enough to go around. There isn't enough to meet demand. Also, civil wars within producing nations for control of their own resources. We're already seeing this in Venezuela and Nigeria. We're likely to see it increasingly, I think, in some Middle Eastern nations. First off, almost certainly in Iraq. And finally, asymmetrical warfare between rich consuming nations and non-state entities in producing nations, otherwise known as terrorism. All of this is in our future. This is just a chart of where the oil shipping lanes are and the increases and mostly increases, some decreases in flows that we are going to see over the next few years. Where are these coming resource wars going to be cited? Of course, the Middle East, West Africa, South America, and Central Asia primarily. Now, what are the alternatives? As you might imagine, I am a passionate advocate for alternative energy resources, particularly newer renewable ones. And we have to take into account just where we are in relationship to those resources. Right now, fossil fuels provide by far the lion's share of our total energy budget. When we get down to the end here, nuclear, wood and waste, hydroelectric, and geothermal and other, footnote, we see that footnote is solar and wind. Looking at it as a pie chart, renewable energy is about 6 to 7% of our total energy budget. And if we explode that, we see that most of that renewable, that 7% slice of the pie, consists of conventional hydroelectric power, wood, and waste. And only about 1% of that little slice is wind, and about 1% is solar. So we're getting a total of about 0.17%. That's 0.17% of our national energy budget from solar and wind combined right now. That means if we were to double the solar and wind capacity that's been installed over the past 20 years, and then double that, which is no mean feat, we're talking about years of work and billions of dollars of investment, we still would be at less than 1% of our national energy budget. So what we actually need to be doing is not investing $1 billion here or there in research and implementation and some tax credits for people to put solar panels on their roofs. We need to be investing literally hundreds of billions of dollars a year in order to overcome our dependence on vanishing fossil fuels. We will need to invest trillions of dollars. By the way, the IEA just came out with a report 2 weeks ago, which said that up to the year 2030, by the way, the IEA still says officially that oil production isn't going to peak before 2030. There will be enough, at least in the optimistic scenarios. They do mention there is a pessimistic scenario in which oil production could peak sooner, but they don't waste much ink on that. They assume that we'll have enough oil till 2030, but it is going to be a lot more scarce and expensive. We will, the world, have to invest hundreds of billions of dollars a year, a total of many trillions of dollars, in order to meet demand by 2030. And by that time, 80% of the growth in energy demand will have been in fossil fuels. So by 2030, we will have invested trillions of dollars, we will be more dependent on fossil fuels, and then what happens? Well then, even by the most optimistic assessments of the IEA, oil production peaks, and we have to invest trillions more in an alternative energy infrastructure. One might ask, well, why don't we just do that now? But unfortunately, that's not on the drawing boards. I am not terribly bullish about the hydrogen economy. Unfortunately, I just had a tour of a hydrogen fuel cell research center and was told by the director that, in fact, currently batteries are a more efficient way of storing energy than hydrogen fuel cells. And fuel cells are still extremely expensive. They don't last long. The best prototypes that I saw on the test table last about 2,000 hours. That's about 3 months of continuous usage. There's no store you can walk into anywhere in the world and buy an off-the-shelf fuel cell to power your home or car. So, what are we to do? We're going to have to look not just at supply-side solutions going forward, but demand-side solutions. And where are we going to get the most bang for our buck? We have to look first at transportation, because that's where we are most dependent on fossil fuels. Over 95%, closer to 100% of our transportation energy is coming from oil. So this is just a chart, which, by the way, is from France, of energy consumption per passenger kilometer in grams oil equivalent. Okay, we see an average car. Of course, this is a European car. Pretty inefficient in the scale of all transportation options. The only thing a little more inefficient would be a short-haul plane going from one city to a neighboring city. But if it's a long-haul plane filled with passengers, that's actually more efficient than a typical automobile, even a European automobile. And then we start getting into regional trains, long-distance bus, city bus, commercial train, national train, Paris Metro, TGV, walking, and finally bicycle, which is the most efficient form of transportation of all. What this is telling us is that we have to start moving our entire transportation system in this direction. And of course, the Europeans are far ahead of us in that regard. The individual automobile is something that we can't afford as a society. We've become addicted to it. We assume it as a birthright as Americans. We've based our whole way of life on it, our suburban infrastructure. But it will be impossible to maintain in the future. We have to find strategies